So this is because it's so large and this scale is just so tremendous. We had to bring 44 mashgichim, or 44 kosher workers, to handle a 2.5-week production run in California.
I know there's a certain kind of liquor that has a worm inside of it. Is that kosher? Can it be kosher? Would the OU ever certify a bottle with a worm inside of it?
That's a good question. I think kosher wine, has been a big contributing factor in the sanctity of Klal Yisrael, the sanctity of the Jewish people.
Welcome to Keeping It Kosher, the podcast where we go behind the scenes of the kosher world. I'm your host, Rabbi Ezra Sarna. Today, we're sitting down in the OU kitchen with a seasoned veteran in the world of kashrus. Rabbi Nachum Rabinowitz is the OU's resident expert on kosher wine and alcohol. He oversees the incredible scale and complexity of large kosher wine programs in secular wineries across the globe. It's an absolutely fascinating conversation that will completely change the way you look at the wine on your Shabbos table. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
My father-in-law always tells the story that when he was getting married, so he was tasked, even though he was the groom, he was tasked with buying the liquor for the wedding. So his friends told him, go to Dubin's Liquor and tell them how many people you have, and then they'll tell you how much liquor you have. And whatever they tell you, get half. So my father-in-law says it was 1982. He went to Dubin's Liquor. He told them how many he was having at the wedding. And they said, based on the numbers, he should get 8 cases of liquor. That's what they usually recommend for weddings. So he bought 4. And he said it was 1982. In those days, he returned 2.5 cases after the wedding was done. And that was 1982. Now, I think whenever you go for Shabbos, generally I find the hosts know many different brands of wine, different kinds of wine. It seems like wine and liquor has taken a new space, a new role in from eating. So you're responsible for a lot of that, I think. So if we can start, if you could just break down what is Yain Nesach, what is Stam Yainam, and are they related?
Excellent question. In antiquity, religion was a very central part of life, whether it was our Jewish religion or whether it was pagan ritual. Religion was part and parcel of, most activity. And wine played a very significant role in that, because wine was used as a libation. It was used in the Beis HaMikdash. It was used as for nesachim. It was poured together with other karbanos, other sacrifices that were brought. But at the same time, it was used by pagan idol worshippers to pour in honor of their deities. There's a concept, it's a biblical concept, of takrovis avodah zarah. That means things which are used to worship idols are forbidden. They're forbidden from consumption. They're also forbidden even to benefit from. As a result, when you lived in a society that was constantly involved with the deities, constantly involved in pouring or sacrificing in honor of the deities, wine was used consistently on that basis. And therefore, it's biblically forbidden for us to drink wine which was poured for avodah zarah. That's what you referred to as being Yain Nesach.
And let me pause you there. Does that exist nowadays? Do they still worship that way?
It's an interesting question. In our Western civilization, the argument has been made that Yain Nesach, which was worshipped, which was sacrificed, doesn't really exist. So what we have today is the second term which you mentioned, which is Stam Yainam. That means general wine, which is from the nations, not specifically made kosher, not specifically made by Jewish people. Now, the reason why that was prohibited was for a second reason. Wine is not so much used in religion today, although we still use it. We use it for a wedding, we use it for Kiddush, to usher in the Shabbos and Yontif. As we exit from the Shabbos and Yontif, we use it by a bris milah. But it's not that much used in the secular world. It is used, obviously, to drink in the context of socialization, fraternization. And there was a concern that we should not allow foreign cultures to mix with our own. We have to have our own identity. We have to have our own sense of self. That's mishum chasanas, as the Gemara calls it. That means we don't want to bring things that will lead to intermarriage, to assimilation. And therefore they said wine, and not just wine, other types of fraternization that would occur in the context of a meal, we try to look for, and they picked on specific issues in which they brought separation between ourselves and others. So yes, of course, we intermingle with the host culture in the diaspora, but there are limitations to that which have really preserved us over the millennia.
So let me ask you, on a technical sense, you have wine, assuming it's already wine. What makes it stam yinam?
If it was handled by people not of the Jewish faith, or people even of the Jewish faith, but who are lacking in their level of observance, so that would be something which is stam yinam. It's wine which is nondescript. That's really, I think, the way you can best define it. It's wine which was not supervised, was not handled by observant Jewish people through its processing.
And is it only pouring? Is it only touching? Is even if someone passes a bottle of wine, what's the getter exactly?
It's more than just passing a closed bottle. A closed bottle, which is sealed, has no concern. It's when it's poured, if it's when it's touched, if it's when it's moved from, let's say, one pouring from a bottle movement. All those are handling restrictions that are applied to wine. And once wine is moved, is handled in that manner, it certainly opens questions to the kosher integrity of the wine.
And is it only an issue with wine, or all the grape flavoring and all the grape juice, is that subject to all the same?
So wine, halachically, is defined as anything which is crushed, meaning grapes from which there's a separation of liquid from the solid, from the pulp or from the skin. And that's even before fermentation, even if it's not alcoholic, even if it's just grape juice. Many times people say, what could possibly be restrictive about grape juice, orange juice, apple juice, or grape? It's all the same. They don't look at it as being different. Wine, they understand there's a certain, uniqueness to it, right, and a special regard that it has. But in halacha, one would have used in the Beis Hamikdash as a sacrifice, as a nisach, as a libation, both wine which was fermented and even wine which was not fermented. And therefore, they're identical in terms of how they're restricted.
And all the grape flavoring, is that actually grape? If you see grape-flavored popsicles or grape-flavored Tylenol, is that actually grape, or is that chemicals with some purple dye?
More likely not. I remember when I first started in the world of kashrus, I once visited a soda company, and they had a naturally flavored grape soda which was certified kosher, and they had a artificially flavored black cherry soda which was not kosher certified. And when I asked why one was and the other was not, I was told that the naturally flavored grape soda had no grape in it, could be kosher, whereas the artificially flavored black cherry did have grape, could not be kosher certified. So the world of flavors, there are many, many thousands, tens of thousands of grape chemicals, some which are identified as natural, some which are identified as artificial. The fact that something has natural flavor does not mean that it has natural juice in it. The fact that something is artificial doesn't mean that it doesn't have juice in it.
What does it mean it's natural flavors?
The FDA has guidelines for what are considered natural components and which are considered artificial components. They're based on a lot of different factors, but the fact that it has natural juice or not is not specifically a factor.
Wow. Okay, I know in the Halachos of stam yinam that Mevushal, whether wine is cooked, is the major question or the major decider. Can you just explain that for a second?
Sure. Back in the day, when people used, wine and grape juice for ritual, they would use only what was considered the best possible, the highest quality type of grape. A wine which was cooked was considered inferior because the cooking process would degrade some of the flavors, some of the nuances, so therefore it would not have been used. As a result, when the rabbis made their prohibitions of wine, they did so specifically for those that might have been used in that context, in the in the worship. They would not have done it for something which was inferior, such as a cooked grape. As a result, anything which was cooked would no longer have a handling restriction.
Right. I see.
You can't take a non-kosher product and cook it and it becomes kosher. Some people confuse that. That's not the case. It's something which is kosher is no longer restricted once it has been cooked in that manner.
Right. And so why is it that Jewish consumers don't just buy Mevushal wine? Like, why is there such a thing as non-Mevushal wine with kosher certification? Is there any preference on halacha for anything? Is it a matter of taste?
So I would say two things. I would say, number one, in Israel, they have not adopted Mevushal as a standard. And the reason for that is some of the...
What does that mean, they have not adopted?
This which I mentioned, that Mevushal relaxes the handling restrictions,
Yes.
that has not been widely adopted in Israel. Two big, maybe more than two, great halachic authorities in Israel, one of them Rav Shomer Shabbos and the other Rav Yashiv, have argued that today's flash pasteurization, which is the most commonly used way to heat wine, does not sufficiently degrade the wine. If it doesn't degrade the wine, then we cannot relax the restriction.
Oh, so in other words, of course they agree to the rule of Mevushal. They just hold that what's done now to wines doesn't qualify as Mevushal. Okay.
Right. So that's one argument. And the other is that the reason why wine which was Mevushal, wine which was heated, is not restricted is because it was considered uncommon. It was not done. You have to remember, beverages, why did they make grape into wine? Why didn't they maintain it as grape juice? There was no feasible way to do that. You could keep it for maybe a week, but then what happens is fermentation will start. That fermentation will turn it maybe into wine, maybe into vinegar, or maybe into some other thing that you wouldn't want to drink. Right. So there was no way to preserve it. Wine was a way of preserving the beverage. Now, that was considered uncommon. People would not cook the wine. And when Chazal made these types of prohibitions, they did so for commonly consumed items. They would not do so for uncommon or abnormal, atypical types of drinks. So therefore, they never... Now, the question is, today, with technology, with the modern processing, would it be considered typical? And my answer to that would be no. Generally, in the broad world of wine is not pasteurized. Some of the sweeter wines may undergo pasteurization to preserve the product, but commonly not. Wines are not. On the other hand, something like grape juice must be pasteurized, because if it weren't pasteurized, it would end up
wine.
Well, wine or something else. It would ferment into something. In fact, what's interesting is that in the mid to late 19th century, there was a Methodist minister who lived in Pennsylvania who was very much opposed to alcoholism, and to the extent that he did not want to use wine in his churches, which was common for the time. They used to use it in the ritual, and he didn't want to do that. So he said, we will use grape juice. We will not use wine. And he had used from that era, someone by the name of Louis Pasteur, who was the inventor of the pasteurization method. He borrowed that from France, that method, and he applied it to grape juice, to make a grape juice that could be used in his church's ritual that would not be alcoholic. That Methodist minister's name was Thomas Welch. And as you might imagine, what evolved was the Welch's Grape Juice Company, which is still a very substantial company in the U.S. market.
Wow. And so in Eretz Yisrael, are the wines labeled Mevushal, not Mevushal?
So in Israel, and this is an area which confuses American consumers because we're accustomed to seeing one or the other, Mevushal or non-Mevushal in every bottle, which is what we prefer as a kashrus agency. However, in Israel, the assumption, the default position is that it's not mevushal. And only those wines which are mevushal, which, by the way, are not that easy to find in the Israeli market. Israelis, for some reason, look askance at mevushal wine. They feel it's inferior, despite what their poskim may have argued. They feel it's not on the same level, and the Israeli consumer is not interested in it. And therefore, you won't find it that frequently. And it's sometimes even here, those wines that come to the U.S., if it doesn't say anything on it, you must assume it is not mevushal.
Wow.
Only where it is mevushal. And the very same wines that are marketed in Israel as non-mevushal, those very same wines can be marketed in the U.S. as mevushal, because they realize their clientele in the U.S. Anybody who, a conscious agency that's supervising a restaurant or catering establishment, a wedding, a bar mitzvah, will insist on mevushal. And the reason for that is that, the waiters and those who serve at these events will, be non-Jews. And as a result, to have non-mevushal wine in that context would be dangerous, because it's very hard to make, to have specific. In Israel, again, there are issues. Not to say in Israel there are no issues that exist, but they have a system whereby you have special people to pour the wine and sort of maintain that supervision over it, even by weddings and those events.
And for the non-mevushal, wine gets better the longer it sits, right? So you have wine, which includes non-mevushal wine, sitting for years. So there's no OU representative staring at the barrels for 12 years while they're aging, right?
Well, 12 years that's more like in the Scotch industry.
Okay.
But yes, there are some wines which are aged for a number of years in barrels. Any time you have kosher wine, and even if it's mevushal, I have to know that this is the wine that we supervised. So it has to have some kind of a seal to protect it. When it's in a tank, we seal the inlet, the outlet, the top, the bottom, in all different spaces. That's how you know that it's in. And that's something which, when you have seals which are sitting sometimes for long periods of time and they're baking in the sun, those seals, that tape can become brittle and can crack and can fall off, which is a concern for us. So we have to find the right solutions that are seals that will endure. And that's important in any case. Whenever you have wine, and even after the bottle, it's bottled, so you have to have the proper capsule on top. You have to have the proper cork, which is it completely tamper-proof, but it's considered legitimate enough that nobody's going to bother to open it up and and replace it, and to it's not worth anybody's while. That would be considered a sufficient enough seal for kosher purposes.
So let me ask you, I think some of the common questions are, a person has a company and he has business associates and he gets a gift of non-kosher wine or non-kosher liquor. What is he supposed to do with that?
In this area, I think there's maybe a distinction between those of Sephardic descent and those of Ashkenazic descent. The Shulchan Aruch, which is obviously the posek for the Sephardic world, the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, was originally from Spain. He ended up in Israel. He argued that even though what we call stam yain today is only rabbinically forbidden, it remains forbidden not just to consume, but also to benefit from. So when one has that type of a product, you can't benefit. If you gift it to somebody else, that also is a benefit to you, because you're benefiting from that, the person receiving the gift. In the Ashkenaz, again, there may be certain ways of, dispensing with it, which are halachically permissible. Speak to a rabbi of that community. But for the Ashkenazic world, the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserlis from Krakow, he argued that because it is not the same level of prohibition, and the whole concept of idol worship really doesn't exist today, he took a more lenient approach, and he did allow the sale or the benefiting from wine. So one could gift it, one could sell it. If someone gives you a gift of $1,000 bottle of wine or more, that can be a significant decision in terms of what direction you take.
Wow. Okay, so as consumers, it's pretty easy. We look for Mevushal. On the off chance that we buy non-Mevushal, we're careful. But you have the job of making sure that it gets to that point, right? From the grape until the sealed bottle. Is the process of overseeing kosher wine, is that easy? Is that hard? I think most people, when we think about kosher certification, we have a mashgiach popping in and popping out. From what you're saying, it doesn't fly with wine.
No, not at all. It's from the products that probably everyone recognizes are the most intensively supervised would be something like shrita, meat and poultry, and wine. Those, and each one has different levels, areas where wine may be more stringent than meat, and obviously, the shrita is a very precise. It requires special expertise and the salting, but wine. From the time, like I mentioned, the time that you start separating the juice from the pulp, from the solid, the handling has to be exclusively by, Shabbos observant Jewish people. So
Wow.
that, can require sometimes very small wineries. You can have, 2, maybe 3. I like to call them kosher workers, not mashgichim. A mashgiach is a supervisor. That's not what we do in wine. We're not just supervising. We are supervising as well, but we're working. We're actually we don't want to bring in people who are not capable of physical labor. That's why.
And the OU brings in, or the companies have to hire them?
No, the OU brings in people. Like I mentioned, sometimes 1 or 2. And as many are, there's a production that happens in one of the largest wineries in the world. And we're not even intending to make wine or even grape juice. We're intending to make grape color. Artificial colors are out, and they're replaced by natural colors. And to make natural color, one of the more popular methods is to use grape extract. So this is because it's so large and this scale is just so tremendous. We had to bring 44 mashgichim, or 44 kosher workers, to handle a 2.5-week production run in California, because there's so many positions. And until we were able to get the grape juice, in this case, Mevushal, until it was concentrated, which was the method which was used for Bishul, we just had so many positions to fill, and the scale is just so enormous. We had hotels and Shabbos meals, and it was a whole production to get this group to come in and do this work.
I mean, that's very complicated logistics, because you're talking about also a very small window of time. It's not like you're offering people full-time jobs. You have to find people who are capable and willing and who have the time.
Yeah, it has to. It's very costly. We have to move people. The wineries are not typically located in Jewish communities, so we have to bring all these people from wherever we can find them. We have to find qualified people, and we have to give them food. We have to give them lodging. We have to provide for their transportation, and they work. They work hard because these are long days. We typically do 12-hour shifts, and we do 2 shifts a day, and they work 24 hours a day, not Shabbos, but they work 24 hours a day in order to achieve that. So it's a big undertaking, and a lot of logistical movement to make that happen.
I mean, I know it's kind of like waiting for an egg to hatch. I mean, they're waiting for the grapes to be ready, and then it's all hands on deck. So is there a month of the year where you don't sleep and you're traveling and you're calling? And
it extends much more than a month. The fact is, the harvest takes place, best of times. It happens like Rosh Hashanah time and Yom Kippur time and Sukkot time. We have mashgichim who are actually in grape juice producing facilities over Shabbos and over Rosh Hashanah. A prerequisite to getting the jobs, you have to know how to blow shofar, because I'm not going to send somebody to be in such an atmosphere who can't be mekayim the mitzvah of tkiyah shofar. So they have to know how to blow shofar. But sometimes they are in, and they've asked questions of their rabbis about if you have, let's say, a kollel fellow in Israel who can earn, in a 3-month period, he can earn enough to support his family, or largely support his family, by spending 3 months in the U.S. in such a facility. And they said, yeah, that's the way you support yourself. Spend Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot. They built Sukkot for them in these locations, and that's how they spend their time through this period.
Is it really worth it for these companies to go through all the expense of hiring new workers and having Shabbos meals for them and Sukkot for them? And are they going to make that back in their sales, having this hashgacha?
The success story of OU in the United States almost defies logic. But I think at the root of it is the perseverance that we will only eat kosher products, and we demand this. And the companies, in the big scheme of things, obviously does not impact their bottom line significantly enough that this is not worth their while. You realize that companies have tremendous marketing budgets. And when a product is declared kosher, they don't have to market it the same way. They don't have to spend the sometimes millions and millions of dollars on marketing a product because they have this consumer, this segment of the community, which will be receptive to a product which is kosher. So I don't understand all the economics behind it, but clearly when consumers want and demand, companies respond to. That's how they survive. That's how they succeed in the marketplace. And the kosher community is a devoted and a loyal consuming public, and companies respond to that.
And does the OU only give hashgacha to wine companies here in North America, or you're dealing with all over the world?
Every major wine region in the world has OU supervision of wine, whether it's in France and Italy and Spain, whether it's even in former Soviet Republic, Georgia, Turkey, believe it or not, has some kosher grape juice productions. Morocco has some kosher grape juice. And not just, in New York and California, but in Washington State, Oregon. We have a winery in Virginia, which is making wine. And every of the 50 states has wine production. Believe it or not, it exists, whether in large or small scale. We're in the Southern Hemisphere, in Chile and Argentina, South Africa, and Australia. So, pretty much wherever the major areas for kosher wine are, we are functioning there.
I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now.
Join the club.
Wow. And is the winemaking season different in all those countries? Like, do you get a break, or all of them are all at the same time? Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere?
I would say in the Northern Hemisphere, there are earlier, for example, Spain, or sometimes the southern part of Israel, the Negev, the season starts earlier. Even in California itself, Southern California starts earlier than Northern California starts. So there are, but in the Northern Hemisphere, it basically falls out end of August, September, October, and maybe even a little bit into November. In the Southern Hemisphere, it's the opposite. So it's not Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, it's Pesach. So
it's like a bad joke.
It is what it is.
It's like your oven breaking Airbnb.
Yeah, it seems to always happen. But they
didn't tell you. They didn't tell you when you signed up for this job.
It's again, but there is activity of wine, bottling of wine, filtering of wine, fermentation of wine, which happens at other seasons. It's sometimes wine is kept for periods of time. It's reserved. It's aged. So it's not as if the wine season, the wine season and the harvest is within a certain window, but there is activity happening really all the time.
So we rely on flash pasteurization. So when does that happen? In other words, you take the grapes, you crush them. I'm sure there's a complicated process, and then they're pasteurized, and then they're put into barrels, and then they're put into whatever kind of holding container.
The answer is all of the above. That can happen at various times. It was traditionally in the Mevushal segment. They used to take wine which was fermented, which was filtered, which was almost ready to bottle. Then they would do the pasteurization, and then they would bottle it. Sometimes they would leave it to rest for a day between the pasteurization and the bottling. That was the most common, and probably still is the most common practice. However, I mentioned before where we have, over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, people, some of those operate with what they call a hot break, which means you bring in the grapes, and before you destem the grapes, you have machinery that takes off the stems, and then and the branches, whatever else is there, so you're basically left with the grapes. And sometimes they immediately cook it up. They may, for their reasons, for maceration purposes, to get the color out, they may only do that up to 130, 140 degrees. For our purposes, we have them rise it up to closer to 190 degrees. So sometimes bishul happens immediately, even before there's any separation. The result is you're ending up with a mush, which is really mostly liquid with pieces floating through it. There's also a technology which is called flash détente. Flash détente was instituted to sometimes correct or rectify grapes that are not doing well, that have certain problems with them. What they do is through a vacuum heating process, they actually explode the grapes immediately as they come in. And they put it through this apparatus, which is an expensive piece of equipment. That sometimes has been used for bishul purposes, whereby the bishul happens immediately, which is a benefit to us, because after that it's no longer restricted from handling.
Right.
So as much as, yes, we have to keep it secure, we have to know where it is, we have to know that we have to seal up the tanks so we know what is the product that we supervised and what is other wine. At the same time, handling is not restricted.
So I mentioned I'm already overwhelmed, but sometimes I'll send an email to different members of Keeping It Kosher asking a certain question, and they say, "Oh, this is Rabbi Rabinowitz's question," and it has nothing to do with wine. So, what else are you involved in Keeping It Kosher?
Yeah, I do. Like I said, a jack of all trades, a master of none. So I do all kinds of different things. I'm working in the OU for 3.5 decades. So I've worked in many different areas, whether it's in bakeries or whether it's in cheese production or whether it's in flavors or you name it. I've dealt with all kinds of different things, and I have experience in a lot of different areas. My focus has been a lot with the wine industry, but that's certainly not the totality of everything that I do in the OU.
So how did you get to the OU? You just give me a bit of your background.
Well, I'm American born and bred, both myself, my parents actually were Yankees, all born. My grandparents came to the United States in the 1920s. That's from both my mother and father's side. And my great-great-grandfather, who was a Hasidic, one of the first major Hasidic rebbes who came to the United States in 1924. So the family has been here, and we, identify as Hasidic. Maybe I look that way a little bit, but at the same time, we're very much, involved in the Jewish community, which, engages the world and is Americanized, and that's why maybe for me the OU was a sort of a fit, because that's what the OU was. The OU was established in, I think, 1898, and it was intended for English-speaking American Jews who were Orthodox, and it was meant to support their way of life. Yes, there were immigrants coming, Yiddish-speaking, and they came here. They didn't come into the melting pot, but the OU, I think, the Orthodox Union, is addressing the needs of many Jews of all walks of life in different levels of acculturation in the United States, which maybe brings us back to the original topic, which is the people say that this is, I think, both Jewish sources and non-Jewish sources who say the greatest evidence to a God in this world is the survival of the Jewish people. And we typically think of it in terms of persecution, wars, pogroms. We think of it in economic terms, how Jews have survived in all kinds of societies. But I think maybe the greatest miracle of all is surviving religiously and surviving culturally in host countries that are not really, and I think kosher wine, has been a big contributing factor in the sanctity of Klal Yisrael, the sanctity of the Jewish people, and the survival of the Jewish people. What has maintained us? Why, all evidence that a people without a nation, without a country for 2,000 years should have somehow blended into larger society. It hasn't happened. And Chazal saw that, and that's why they keyed in on something like wine as a method of preserving us.
And are you also a Rav of a community?
Well, like I said, my great-great-grandfather came to the United States, established a shul in Brooklyn. It's not in the same location. It's in its fourth location, but I'm still, running that same shul in Brooklyn. A continuation of what was begun generation after generation. So that's another of the hats that or shtreimels that we wear.
Wow. And how did you first start working? Did you just walk into the doors and knock and say, like, I'm interested in wine?
Well, what happened was I was, after I got married, I was already running a shul at the time. I needed parnasa because my wife was expecting her first child. And I was learning at the time in Yeshiva Tarvadas. And Rabbi Yisrael Belsky, who was the paisik here at the OU, I knew him very well and studied by him as well. He was helpful through Rabbi Genek in finding this position for me here in the OU.
Wow.
And I'm still here. They haven't thrown me out yet.
I don't think they're planning on it. So let me ask you some other things that I think consumers have a lot of questions about. Can you distill, and pardon the term, the issue of sherry casks?
Oh, we're going into a whole new topic.
They can edit it out if they want to.
That's a podcast unto its own. Sherry is a fortified wine from Spain. It's a wine which has added to it additional alcohol. Typically, wine stops fermenting at about 14, maybe 15%. Occasionally, you can get it up to 16, 17%, depending on the strain of yeast that's used. What happens is the alcohol actually kills the bacteria. The yeast is a bacteria. So when it reaches a certain level, it stops fermenting because the bacteria is dead. So how do you bring sherry up to 19, 20% alcohol? What you do is you take some of the wine and you distill it. Distillation is separating and concentrating alcohol, and then you add that to the wine. In Scotland, for some reason, historically, they needed vessels in order to age. They needed wooden vessels, and they found out that in Spain, they had all these casks that had been used for sherry, and they started using it, and they found that it didn't just age as it would have aged in old whiskey barrels. They found that it did something to improve, to enhance it. Why that happens, I've heard a lot of different, suggestions as to why that is. But sherry became popular. Port, which is a similar type of product from Portugal, and also some of the sweet wines like Sauterne. These barrels happen to do well with whiskey. So what they do is they age the whiskey for a period of time, whether it's 10 years, 11, 12, 14, 15, whatever it is years, in X whiskey barrels. And then for a finishing touch, they'll put it into a sherry cask, a port cask, for a period of a year, maybe 2 years, less, more. And they find that finishing enhances the product. And they advertise this. They're proud of the fact that they do this, and they market the product as accordingly. Problem is, the sherry, the port, the Sauterne are not kosher unless they specifically went out of their way. I know the Kedem company does. They send port casks, which are kosher, for aging of their own products. There are some others that do this as well, but it's a very limited offering. So when you have whiskey aging in wine casks, which are not kosher, so how does that impact this kosher status of the whiskey? So I would say this, the OU would not kosher certify a product that sat in a non-kosher wine cask. And as Rebelsky said it like this, b'di'evid, post facto, is it kosher? Technically, likely, yes, because the various halachos, there's bittul, there's nullification of the wine in the whiskey. That's probably, again, I don't know that everyone agrees with that under all circumstances, but that's probably an accurate statement. But he says they don't need the OU to we don't certify products on the basis of bittul. We don't do that by a cookie. We don't do that by a glass of soda. We're certainly not going to do it by a whiskey. So when we certify, we'll only certify a product that does not have those types of casks altogether. This is an area where many people took a position where whiskey is kosher, and there were assumptions which were made. Is there reason for someone to take a stringent position? I would say yes. And I could go into some detail, but leaving that aside, there is a reason to take a more stringent position. But at the same time, I can't be critical of anybody who takes a lenient position, because likely the product is going to be kosher.
But I know I've gotten a lot of questions lately about beer and kosher flavors and beer certification, and the OU saying that at OU events we should only have kosher certification. Where's the confusion over there? It seems like it's a pretty simple rule that the OU is saying you can't, without certification, you don't really know what's kosher, what's not. So you should have kosher certification.
So again, with the beer, probably even less issues than with whiskey. Beer was assumed to be kosher because it's malted barley, and it's hops, and it's yeast, and what could possibly be wrong with it? That was an assumption, and it was probably a valid assumption for the most part. Then all of a sudden came microbreweries, and they started experimenting with all different types of things. They would add some lactose, which is a sugar which will convert into alcohol, and it sometimes gives a certain creamy texture to the beer. And they found that people liked that. Sometimes they used grape juice, which was not kosher unless specifically made as kosher. And they started using flavors and all kinds of, here in the United States, people will not buy a soda unless it has a hechsher because of the flavors. Compound flavors potentially could have issues. Once you start using flavors in beer, it's like any other flavored, beverage. So no reason to differentiate. So, the large beer companies, the standard typical beers, probably haven't changed much. But because you have so many, in fact, the OU, I think more recently, had an application from a company which we discovered was using 30% lactose in a beer product. You can. Sugar will ferment into alcohol. So you can use the starch, convert it into sugar, convert it into alcohol of the malted barley. You can use other things. So once you have, all these different potential problems, and thank God there's also, hundreds and thousands of products which are kosher certified, the OU and other kosher agencies, the major kosher agencies, decided that instead of making assumptions, instead of guesswork, we should take a position. There's enough product available which is kosher, which is certified. We should take a position that when we, the OU, other agencies certify a restaurant or certify an event, in a catered event, we should insist on having a product with a hechsher.
So let me ask you this. Last week I was in Kiddush, and there was a fellow, and he said, Rabbi, why can't the OU just get an OU on this brand of whiskey or liquor? And the assumption in his question was that the OU can influence companies to get hashgacha. Is that a wrong assumption?
The power of the OU, this is, I think, a more general question. The power of the OU is not the OU, it's the consumer. If consumers demand products, realize that in every product, there's usually, today, 800 number, probably not. They probably have a website, visit our website, comment, we welcome your comments. Not that many people from the consumer base, actually contact the company. So every contact is measured in thousands by them. If we, the consumer, and I say we, I don't mean the OU, the consumers would demand certain things from companies, they would likely respond. I work with, many of the largest liquor companies. Some of the, let's say, Diageo or Pernod Ricard. These are, multinational companies with dozens and dozens of brands of liquors. The attitude that many have is an attitude which we've taught them. We're going to buy your product with or without the hechsher. So they don't feel that. The liquor company had a lot of Jewish influence. And many of the Jews who were in the industry said, doesn't need a hechsher. And they're still remembering those comments. If the consumer says, you know what, does it make sense that for spring water, we insist on a hechsher? And for soda pop, we insist on a hechsher. And for cookies, we insist on a hechsher. But we readily buy, a product, a liquor product, which doesn't have a hechsher. That you're voting with your feet.
People very often ask about, there's a certain liquor. I don't really drink or know so much. My kids know that Purim is a working holiday for me. But I know there's a certain kind of liquor that has a worm inside of it. Is that kosher? Can it be kosher? Or you ever certify a bottle with a worm inside of it?
That's a good question. What you're referring to is mezcal. That's a Mexican agave-based drink, similar to tequila. Tequila is from one region. Mezcal is from a variety of regions. And in a specific area, to sort of identify the product as coming from that area, they take a worm, which is native to that region, and they put it into the bottle. Technically speaking, toloim, which this falls into that category, are what we call nois and tam lifgam. That means that any flavor that it would impart would be a negative flavor and therefore would be permitted. So could you technically drink the bottle? Don't eat the worm. But could you drink the bottle that the worm sat in? Yes. But it's something that, it's not palatable in my mind, but technically it probably would not negatively impact the kosher status of the product. But I think it's only a very limited region that does this, maybe a limited number of products that
they haven't sent an application yet.
I haven't seen one.
What's the most exotic place that you've been to in your travels?
That's a tough question.
Have you been to every continent in the world?
No, I've never been to Asia. Although we certify wine in Australia, which is close to Asia. No, I've never been there. We have sent some of our senior wine experts there, but I've not been. But I've been to some continents. One interesting place I came to is a country you probably never heard of, probably most of the world never heard of. It's called Transnistria. Transnistria is a break-off communist portion of the country of Moldova. They identify themselves as being a separate country. You see the sickle and hammer, the communist sickle and hammer there. And it's almost like I've been to Soviet Russia when it was still Soviet Russia. This was sort of like reminding me of it. And this little strip of land, I flew to Kishinev, which is, Moldova's capital, and I went through passport control. But when we drove to Transnistria, I had to go through another passport control because they view themselves as being, I don't think the world recognizes them as a separate country. So it was very, fascinating, like going back 50 years back to a Soviet republic. But they do make a wine and a brandy based on wine, which is kosher there. So that was an interesting, I've had other interesting experiences. I don't do just wine, but that was one that comes to mind when I'm thinking about wine.
Did you ever have a really big scare in wine production?
We've had to sometimes take tanks, which may have, tens of thousands of liters or gallons of liquid, and declare them non-kosher, which doesn't make the company that produced them happy. Certainly the people who had to pay for mashgichim, it has happened. It's not a common occurrence. We try to do things in a way but mistakes happen. Sometimes it's the company's own fault. We tell them, this is a chaysim, this is a seal that cannot be touched. And if they go and they decide they're going to open up seals,
And you put in the contract that if they violate it, then they have to spill out the wine, or they just can't sell it as kosher?
They don't have to spill out the wine. We're not here, to be vindictive and to make them waste. But if we can't certify the product, we will not allow them to sell it as kosher. Absolutely.
Has modern technology helped hashgacha of wine?
Wine is made mostly the way it was made thousands of years ago, but with the aid of different equipment. Let me give you an example. When you make red wine, so what you typically do is you have the skins fermenting together with the juice in a tank. But you have to, mix it. And that's called remontage in French, or pump overs. It means you're pulling out wine from the bottom of the tank and pumping it back up to the top of the tank. That's a process that can be done manually or it can be done automatically. And when you have these pumps which are put into place and everything is sealed in place, still a mashgiach would be the one who has to turn on the button that can be done remotely. Today you can do a lot of different things remotely. So if we seal it up in a way that the only person who could activate the pump would be the mashgiach. So even if he's not, remember, wineries are not always that convenient to get to. To have a mashgiach drive for 4 hours to do a 15-minute task is not always economically reasonable. So if we can do this through a remote type of system, that would work. Every time they have to take a sample from a fermentation tank, if it's non-Mevushal wine, only a mashgiach can open up the valve and pull out the sample and then give it to the winemaker for him to decide what has to be done. If we can do that, we had once a doctor who decided to go into wine, and he was an inventor of medical equipment. If you're familiar with like insulin dosing, that means a person who is diabetic wears a device that measures the sugar levels within the blood and then doses insulin. So we developed a system like that where the sample can be automatically removed from the tank, and it can't even be caught into a cup, which would be a problem because wine has a unique chumrah, a unique stringency called nitzik chibur, that if you pour from kosher into non-kosher, so is a reverse contamination. So you take out a small sample into a small flask and you just made the entire tank forbidden. So what we do is it's not a direct stream. It falls out, this dosing machine comes into another receptacle, which only then can they open up and remove it. So it's indirect. As again, we use where feasible, we try to use it. The danger with technology is it's only as effective as the people who are managing it. I know many times people say, "Well, we have cameras, but there's nobody watching the cameras." So it can be an extension of what we do, but there has to be a human being ultimately involved with it.
Can I ask you a personal question?
I may not answer.
What's your favorite wine?
My favorite wine. The style of wine that I like is more Israeli and Napa style, which is bolder flavors, usually blends, like a Cab, a Petit Verdot type of blend. That's my personal favorite, but wine is, there are a lot of wonderful wines out there. And sometimes it's not even so much the varietal, it's the quality. And sometimes people think, well, if you paid $100 for the bottle versus $20 for the bottle, I've heard this. Jeff Morgan is the founder of the Covenant Winery it's in Berkeley. That's mostly based on Napa grapes. He always says, "Forget about the price. If you like it, drink it."
What are the moments where you feel the most sipuk from your job at the OU?
When you're involved in Klal work, when you're benefiting Klal Yisrael, everyone in their own work is doing good. They're supporting their families, enabling their families to have chinuch and to have, all what's necessary to raise Jewish families. That's all fantastic. But when you're involved in Klal work, you can more easily make the association between what we do, and I don't mean myself, I mean what we as a group do here at the OU, with what benefits the Klal Yisrael. And something that comes to mind is something I heard from Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, who was the former chief rabbi of the Sephardic chief rabbi in Israel. And he once spoke here at the OU, and he said that just as Chazal say that machalas asurais, forbidden foods, are metamtem es halev, they sort of stop up and they block the, it's like artery blockages, but not the physical heart, but the spiritual heart that enables a person to grow. And the opposite, conversely, when we provide legitimately kosher foods to Klal Yisrael, even if they're not thinking about it when they consume them, it's mefatech. It opens up those channels, that ability for them to grow. So that always resonated with me because I can feel that when I do my job properly, if I don't do it, obviously not, but if I do my job properly, and when I do my job properly, and when those around me all work together to this common goal, we're actually having Klal Yisrael grow spiritually.
That was an incredibly illuminating conversation. Thank you, Rabbi Rabinowitz, for taking the time to join us today. And thank you for tuning in to Keeping It Kosher. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. We'll see you next month as we continue to uncover the stories behind the symbol.